Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast, celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.
Growing up and getting older often means reappraising things later in life. Things that you either just didn't get or outright avoided when you were a youth, and then much older you completely change your mind. One such example of this for me is a certain song by Gary Numan that lasted over 9 minutes long. And not only that, but it was the album opener, an album where 2 of the first few songs are pushing the 10-minute mark. Now, as someone who grew up usually preferring their songs to be under 5 minutes most of the time, this meant that Gary Numan's dance album was rather overlooked by me in favour of more palatable records like The Pleasure Principle or Telecon. And it's not just me. Upon release, Dance received mixed reviews, and while a decent success at the time, it failed to match its predecessors and was largely forgotten for years. However, in the last few years, Dance has had something of a resurgence. Various contemporary reviews have cited Dance as not only one of Gary's best, but one of the best new wave albums of the early 80s by any artist. And when I put the call out for ideas for future episodes, Dance, and in particular the subject of this episode, came up more than any other. So for this episode, we'll return to the Dance album once more, and in particular, the peculiar, fascinating and absorbing opening track, Slowcar to China. Coming in at 9 minutes and 5 seconds long, it remains one of Gary's longest ever songs, alongside fellow dance track Cry the Clock Said. As album openers go, it instantly signals in a new era for Gary. The robot era of his previous albums was moving on to a more experimental, minimal jazz-funk style collection, as if the machine had become more self-aware. The song begins slow with just electronic percussion and Japan legend Mick Karn's hypnotic bass. It sets the scene perfectly and certainly helps you picture Gary in his fedora hat entering a smoky, futuristic landscape. It's a full 1 minute and 30 seconds before Gary's slurring and husky vocals kick in, along with a thudding drum beat. Then the real beauty of the track begins. Despite being over 9 minutes, it somehow never outstays its welcome. The atmosphere and soundscapes it creates just makes you want to lie back and enjoy the world it is transporting you to. Now, the term Slowcar to China could be a play or variation on the common English idiom slow boat to China, which emerged in the 1940s and refers to taking a long, indirect route or a very slow method to reach a destination. The phrase is often used metaphorically to describe something that's taking much longer than necessary. The original phrase slow boat to China likely originated from gamblers who used it to refer to a gambling scheme with low odds of winning. It would take so long to get rich that you might as well be taking a slow boat to China. It was then popularised by the 1948 song On a Slow Boat to China, written by Frank Loesser. Lyrically, Gary appears to be singing about some kind of prostitute that he has apparently fallen in love with. She'll pay the rent for the use of you, she'll pay the rent for the use of you tonight. However, However, Dance was recorded around the time that Gary had a very messy and public breakup with a woman who called herself Debbie Doran. In his book, Gary noted how his friends would warn him away from her as she was bad news and had connections to so-called bad underground people, and she eventually sold her story to the papers, blackmailing him in the process. And you wonder how much of that situation before or after inspired the song. Gary sings as if he's with someone who he's enamoured with, but is showing him no real love unless he pays her. He even calls her an elegant bitch and that he is just a shy young fool. He then references a little green worm inside his head, perhaps referring to some kind of drug or pill clouding his judgment.
Take a Slowcar to China. She will. A little green worm inside my head. She will. She'll take a Slowcar to China.
There's also references to a Mr. Jones, you will pay Mr. Jones. Perhaps this is a reference to Debbie's dodgy underground colleagues to pay her off to go away. Who knows? But all in all, it paints a fascinating and somewhat seedy image. And then perhaps the best line of all is the part where Gary sings, "There's nothing much to keep us alive but dance. All that she can say is goodbye. All things change, I suppose. We'll sing without voice, without heart, and leave no address. I'll never ever see you again, I know."
Just pretend it's for real. You won't pay like before. Just pretend it was me. You won't pay Mr. Jones. There's nothing much to keep us alive but dance. All that she can say is goodbye. All things change. That's the powers. We'll sing without voice, without heart, leave no undress. I will never ever see you again. I know.
It is here where the term dance is referenced, and by now listeners must have realised that the album is anything but something to dance to, and if anything it is a somewhat ironic use of the word, either meaning sex or dancing metaphorically from one scene in life to the next. In a blog post online by Vicky X. Lee, she writes about a very rare Gary Numan dance demo cassette which displayed on the cover of the track Dance/I Suppose. The I Suppose line is also uttered in Slowcar to China. And it wasn't until the Dance CD release in the 90s which unveiled the title track, which didn't end up on the original LP.
No more than Johnson told is quite surprising. I could walk out and just impress myself. I need to hurt, I need to crash for my sake. You are something that I could do without. And I could always take the pills and leave, but you have to stay awake to stay away.
It's a shame this wasn't on the album as it's a great track, but it shows just how great Dance was as an album. Its minimalism was its greatest strength, and it's a beautiful listen from start to finish. However, this was its downfall at the time, commercially at least. as Gary himself said.
The dance album entered the charts at number 3 in September 1981. It was a very different animal to the things I'd done before, and I loved it. I thought I successfully changed shape and gone in a new direction, musically and visually. I had a new image, based on the Underground Ghost, and a definite change of style musically. I remember Martin Mills from Beggar's Banquet sitting down and listening through it with me. At the end he said, "I can't really hear a single." I knew from that, and the conversation that followed, that he didn't think it was the album I should have made. I still love that album, but the sales made it clear the fans were not so keen. Dance sold 60,000 albums in the UK, less than half of what Telecon had done, and far less than a quarter of the sales of the Pleasure Principle and replicas. Where Telecon had been angry and full of paranoia, Dance was sad and haunting. In many ways, it was an open door into the way I was feeling at the time. Marty Mills was right. If I wanted to build momentum after Telecon, and especially after Wembley, Dance was definitely the wrong album. But as a songwriter, what can you do? You write songs based on how you feel, about your experiences, your fears, your hopes. Not every album is going to be the same, or look at things the same way. That's arguably what makes an artist interesting, but I understand why it can also mean the end of them.
So Slowcar to China had Mick Karn on bass, Tim Steggles on percussion, Chris Payne on viola, and then Gary on vocals and synths. It says it was the Polymoog, the Prophet 5, Roland JP4, CP30 and the CR78. So taking your comments about the track, FX Space Trader said, Slowcar, lengthy, enigmatic, its melodic mood, best on my headphones, that Numan year was epic, Wembley, his round the world flight etc, his retirement, shock, felt lost, such a megastar, and this album was my second favourite of his catalogue, Icing Rain and Exhibition, also great tracks. Steve Butterworth said, the first time I played it, it wasn't what I was expecting and rather slow, but it grew on me, now a classic, Gary was always ahead of the game. Homer said, brilliant track, a major departure from his Machine trilogy style. I will admit the 12-year-old me hearing this on release didn't get it, however it's more mature music, so as I grew up I began to appreciate it. Heresy I know, but I prefer Dance to Telecon now. Ted Matson said, by the time Dance was released I was a huge fan, hearing Slowcar for the first time was mind-blowing. The atmospheric depth and delicate minimalism immediately indicated that Dance was different, a work of art that is still my favourite album, so bold to begin with that song. Mike Walsh said, Mick Karn's bass playing is sublime, the song's arrangement is sparse yet complex at the same time. Gary's sense of rhythm is underrated too, accompanying the CR78 drum machine and other rhythmic instruments, which all add to the atmospheric and unique arrangement, a hidden gem. And Paul Pablo Hines said, completely different from what he'd done. Telecon was his previous album before Dance. You'd have a hard job to think they came from the same artist. So doing this episode, I'd say that I've got a newfound respect for Slowcar to China and also the Dance album as a whole, really. It's one of Gary's most, if not the most fascinating album opener of his career, with such a great sound that still sounds fresh today. But can you believe it? From what I can see, he's never performed it live. So perhaps it's time for a Dance album tour. So that's it for this episode of Electric Friends. Thanks for joining me as ever. I'll be back next time with another track from the Gary Numan history. If you'd like to get in touch, please do at newmanpodcast@gmail.com or head online to the socials. I'm at Numan Podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok, and you can also find all episodes on YouTube, including video versions of my past interview specials. And I'd also love to read out your emails about your own personal Numanoid stories, about how you became a fan and your favourites Numan memories, so please get in touch. Head to newmanpodcast.com for more, and please subscribe, rate and review if you haven't already, and spread the word to your fellow Numanoids. For now, speak soon, until next time.
Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.